Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're setting up a highly focused, super high-yield exam review session. So if you've got a test coming up or maybe a big essay to write, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to break down one of the most famous pieces of 20th century literature, and we'll be focusing heavily on the key plot points, character motivations, and those massive overarching themes. So go ahead and grab your notebooks, get comfortable, and let's get ready for an energetic review session.
Okay, let's dive into this. Notice the striking cover art for George Orwell's classic, Animal Farm. We're looking at a pig, fully dressed in military attire, just kind of looming over the silhouettes of the other farm animals. And honestly, this single image perfectly establishes our entire focus for today, how a farm built on the pure, genuine hope of equality tragically devolved into a brutal dictatorship. It's a story of exactly how power is abused, and we're going to look at how that happens step by step.
But before we look at our roadmap, let's start with the ultimate hook. Consider this incredibly famous paradox from chapter 10. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. This single sentence, right here, represents the ultimate betrayal of the animals' revolution. It's the exact moment where the original dream is just completely destroyed. So how did they get here? How on earth did a promise of total equality turn into this twisted justification for tyranny? Well, that is exactly what we're going to map out. Here is our roadmap for today's review. First, the spark of rebellion. Second, the historical allegory. Third, corrupting the commandments. Fourth, the rise of Stalin. And finally, Orwell's final message.
Section 1. The Spark of Rebellion. And this brilliantly illustrates the tragic arc of the entire novel. Notice this 5-step timeline. In Chapter 1, Old Major inspires the animals to literally dream of freedom. By Chapter 2, they actually successfully rebel and drive out the abusive Mr. Jones. And right there, that's the absolute peak of their hope. But then look at the descent. In Chapter 5, the pig Napoleon becomes a dictator. By Chapter 7, public executions begin, completely replacing hope with absolute fear. And finally, by Chapter 10, the pigs are walking on 2 legs, becoming visually indistinguishable from the very humans they originally fought against. It is a straight line from a hopeful rebellion straight down to total corruption.
The absolute catalyst for this entire timeline happens in Chapter 1. Old Major gathers all the animals together and tells them this: the life of an animal is misery and slavery. And this is the core baseline goal of the whole revolution. Old Major points out that humans exploit the animals, taking absolutely everything they produce. By teaching them the song Beasts of England, he inspires a massive rebellion against human oppression. You see, everything that follows is supposed to be the solution to this initial misery.
Moving right along to Section 2, the historical allegory.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how neatly Orwell maps his fictional characters to real-world history. I actually highly encourage you to pause and take a screenshot of this crucial character mapping for your notes. Just look at the key players here. Napoleon, the dictator pig, represents Stalin. Snowball, the idealistic pig, well, he's Trotsky. Old Major is a fascinating mix of Marx and Lenin. Then you have the wider society, right? Boxer, the hardworking horse, represents the working class. Squealer is the literal embodiment of Soviet propaganda. Mr. Jones is the overthrown Tsar Nicholas II. And those terrifying dogs, they directly represent Stalin's secret police.
Now, to really nail your essays, you need to detail how the fictional rebellion perfectly mirrors these real-world events. Down in Russia, the people were starving and angry, which led revolutionaries to overthrow Tsar Nicholas II in 1917, just exactly like the animals overthrowing Mr. Jones. After the Tsar, Lenin and later Stalin took control, which is directly mirrored by the pigs taking leadership on the farm. They promised total equality, right? But ultimately, they created a brutal regime. Millions suffered under Stalin, just as the animals suffer under Napoleon.
Section 3, corrupting the commandments.
Let's compare the original ideals with the completely twisted reality that unfolds. The original 7 commandments aimed to establish total equality and strictly forbade any human behaviors. No sleeping in beds, no drinking alcohol, no wearing clothes. But just look at the reality of what happens. The hypocrisy begins as early as Chapter 3, when the pigs take the milk and apples entirely for themselves, claiming they need it for their brain work. Later on, they move into the farmhouse, and eventually they start acting entirely like humans. The rules constantly evolve just to protect the pigs' privileges.
A perfect example of this happens in Chapter 6. So the original commandment was simply, no animal shall sleep in a bed.
But once the pigs move into the farmhouse and actually start sleeping in beds, the animals check the barn wall and find the rule now suddenly reads, "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets." This super subtle addition perfectly demonstrates the gradual, sneaky rewriting of history to suit the leaders. Squealer manipulates the truth, and the animals, who honestly can't read very well, are easily gaslit into believing it was literally always this way.
All right, Section 4, the rise of Stalin. So the crucial point is this four-step method Napoleon uses to consolidate absolute power over the entire farm. Step 1, remove rivals. Napoleon and Snowball argue for control, so Napoleon violently chases him away. Step 2, instill fear. He uses the dogs to terrify the other animals right into submission. Step 3, manipulate the truth. He uses Squealer as a walking propaganda machine to rewrite history and justify all his actions. And Step 4, create a cult of personality. Eventually, Napoleon is never spoken of simply as Napoleon, and Boxer adopts that deeply tragic maxim, Napoleon is always right.
Let's look a bit closer at Step 1, which actually goes down in Chapter 5. Snowball proposes building a windmill to help everyone out, but Napoleon, he doesn't want to share power. The text literally says, 9 enormous dogs dashed straight for Snowball. This incredibly violent power grab perfectly represents Stalin using his secret police to exile his political rival Trotsky. And from this exact moment on, totalitarianism officially begins on Animal Farm. The debates are totally over. To summarize this section for your thematic notes, these are the core themes that drive the dictator's narrative. Power and corruption go completely hand in hand as the pigs slowly but surely become tyrants. Inequality rises as all animals are equal just becomes a total lie. Propaganda is a constant force, with Squealer constantly twisting the truth to excuse the pig's terrible behavior. Violence and control are maintained by the dogs, enforcing total, unquestioning obedience. And ultimately, there is a complete betrayal of the ideals the animals fought so hard for back in Chapter 1. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5, Orwell's final message. Orwell's big ideas ultimately boil down to this: power corrupts those who hold it. Revolutions fail when leaders become tyrants. And tragically, it is the ordinary people who suffer the absolute most. And honestly, there is no better symbol for this than Boxer, the hardworking horse who so perfectly represents the working class. I mean, he works tirelessly, giving literally everything he has for the farm, constantly repeating, "I will work harder." And what is his ultimate reward? When he collapses in Chapter 9, Napoleon betrays him and sells him to the knacker, a literal slaughterhouse, just to buy whiskey for the pigs. Squealer lies about it, of course, but the betrayal is absolute. The working class absolutely bears the brunt of the tyranny. Which brings us to the utterly devastating final scene in Chapter 10. The pigs actually invite neighboring human farmers over for a card game. The other animals look through the farmhouse window, watching the pigs, who, remember, are now walking on 2 legs, wearing clothes, and drinking alcohol, just mingle with the humans. And the text reads, "It was impossible to say which was which." The pigs have become visually and morally indistinguishable from the very humans they originally overthrew. The cycle of oppression is 100% complete. And that leaves us with a final, really provocative question to think about for your exam essays. If the animals simply traded one tyrant, Mr. Jones, for another tyrant, Napoleon, how can future revolutions avoid this brutal cycle of oppression? Orwell shows us just how easily power corrupts and how terrifyingly easy it is for the masses to be manipulated by propaganda and fear. Understanding the precise mechanics of how this revolution was hijacked is the ultimate key to Orwell's warning. Keep these themes, these character allegories, and these plot points front and center in your mind, and you are going to do incredibly well on your exam. Thanks for joining this review session on The Explainer, and happy studying.